I know you remember that Thorfinn's dad told him that he has no enemies, and Thorfinn at the time was like, what do you mean I have no enemies? Of course I have enemies. Like, this guy, he killed you, basically. And it's just like, well, he started to think about this over time, over his life, and over his time as a slave in the second season. He's like, what does it mean to not have enemies? Because once his drive, his purpose ended, which if you guys haven't watched all the way through season 1, click off on this video right now. I'll give you about 3 seconds before I jump in. Okay, I'm hoping that the people that are here now have already watched all the way up to season 1, and if not, then I gave you a fair warning with the spoilers. So once Thorfinn was able to once Askeladd died at the hands of, it wasn't Canute, well, it kind of was Canute, it was more or less the whole entourage of people, but like at that point in time, when that happened, Thorfinn lost the enemy and his reason to fight. He lost his soul, he lost his purpose, he lost his dharma, he lost his reason for doing what he was doing with his life. So he had no more enemies to fight on the outside. And this is something that I've come to realize, at least, and hopefully in this video you'll be able to realize this too at the end of it. It's like he had all these enemies and he was killing all these people at the end, and yet when we look at season 2, what we see is Thorfinn, he has to go within himself. He has to go within his mind. He goes inside of his mind and he goes to Valhalla, the opposite of Valhalla, when he sees Askeladd again and all the lost souls and the people that he had killed holding on to him and trying to bring him down into the depths of hell. And this wasn't on the outside. Like, this was him imagining this on the inside. It wasn't anywhere outside of him. It was all within him. And this is something that maybe you have come to realize, and I hope you've come to realize since you've been watching my videos, is he had the solution within himself the whole time. He had to overcome the enemies that stood in his path on the inside, not on the outside. The outside takes care of itself. However, the enemies are all within. So he had all these enemies. He had all these demons that were inside of him that kept keeping him awake, that was giving him nightmares, like of all the pillaging that he did as a kid, of all the people that he killed, of all the terrible things that he had done as a child, would wake him up at night in a sweat. And he felt like he had no reason to live. Like, he was telling this to Einar, where it's just like, I have no reason. Like, what's my purpose now? Like, I don't know what to do. Like, he was filled with all this vengeful hate, like despise and despair for so many years. He didn't know who he was without that. And this is the great part about like being reborn and like having your current mission come to an end, is you get to be able to create a new mission. You be able to get to create a new dharma, a new purpose for your life. And you understand this by realizing that the only enemy that you truly have is yourself. Nobody outside of you is your enemy. You don't have to fight your enemies on the outside. You can fight your enemies on the inside. It's why there's a philosopher, a psychologist called Carl Jung, where he talks about this concept around you want to integrate different aspects of yourself, and it's basically going to all-out war. Like, you have a war within yourself right now. Like, if you close your eyes and imagine this for a second, you can kind of think of it as like a round table, basically. And you have each individual aspect of yourself trying to like take control of the ship or of the battle that is in front of you. Sometimes it may be a battle of like wits, it may be a battle of strength, it may be a battle of like stamina, it may be any sort of battle that you have in mind. But like, you have all these other different versions of yourself. You can kind of think about it as like a pie. Like how a pie has all the cuts in it. You want to get that pie to be whole again. It's harder to have it be whole, but like, you can make it whole again. And this is where Thorfinn had to realize that like, he has no enemies, and why he was able to take so many punches at the end of season 2 was because he understood that he had like no more enemies. He had no reason to fight. Like, he didn't have to show how strong he was. He knew how strong he was. He had proven it to himself over and over and over again in his youth. So he had no real reason and no reason whatsoever to have to fight these other guys. When it's like, dude, violence isn't the answer. I have no enemies. The only enemy that I ever had to face and go against was myself. Because you can see this in Thorfinn as he goes through his age, as he goes from a kid to middle age to like more or less an adult. At the time, like, his anger was directed at himself. It wasn't directed at like Askeladd for killing his dad. It was directed at himself for not being strong enough to be able to stand up and help protect his dad in the situation. What it was he was just trying to like be a kid. Like, he could have had this childhood, he could have had this life, and yet it was taken away from him because he thought that he had an enemy, even though the enemy that he was battling was his own inadequacies, his own self-doubt, his own fears, his own willingness and his own inability to be able to create and defend those that he truly cared for. So the enemy wasn't on the outside of him. It was on himself for being weak and frail and not being able to protect and actually being a hindrance for his dad and causing his dad's death in the first place. So he was like, I have all these other people that are enemies, whereas dad's like, no, you don't have any enemies. There are no enemies. You were your own enemy. You were your own worst enemy, and yet you were also your own best friend. And this is what I loved about the story of season 2 is like how Thorfinn was able to realize this through the help of having somebody that had never been to war, that was a peaceful farmer that didn't have this like rough childhood growing up. Like, yeah, sure, Einar, he lost his, another spoiler for season 2. You can click off. I'll give you 3 seconds. Sure, he lost his mom and his sister, but like he didn't kill all these other people like Thorfinn did. He wasn't pillaging. He wasn't doing all these other crazy things. All he did was like he had like a kind of a mediocre life growing up. So having that aspect coming to Thorfinn when all Thorfinn had ever known was like violence and despair and like fighting and like this whole world that like he grew up in, like that's all he knew. So that's all he ever understood, and that's how he understood to like deal with problems and interact with other individuals and have like conflicts resolved was basically by killing them, by fighting for his life. But it's like he didn't have to do that. If he would have just been peaceful like he was at the end of season 2 and been like, I have no enemies, like I'll take all the hits, like I know how to take the hits, like I can bow out of them, I won't even bow out of them, I'll just take them like a man, like a champ, because like this is what I do. Sometimes we have to, and I'll make another video on this as well too, maybe on One Piece, where Luffy and Zoro don't fight it against Bellamy, which if you want to see that, subscribe and leave a comment down below, and I'll make sure to include that in the roster of videos that are going to be coming up. But yeah, it's just like Thorfinn had to take the hits from outside of him, even though it was like him taking the hits on the inside of him. So it was 100 hits, because I have a feeling that he probably killed 100 plus people or so. So he was making repentance, he was making right for all the lives that he had killed in the past by taking those hits on face forward by the other dude when he wanted to see Canute again for the first time after his enslavement. And this is something that, like, if you want to become free, if you understand how to become free, like, you got to look within yourself. It's not outside of you, it's all within. And there's a part in the Bible, and I'll just use this, like, you don't have to use this if you don't want to, but I know there's probably a lot of people that are maybe Christians, maybe Muslims, maybe there's other parts in the Quran and other individual, like, religious texts that kind of relay this certain trait, I would say, but it's just like the kingdom is within you. So like you have to sit with yourself. You have to sit and look within inside yourself, because every feeling and experience that Thorfinn had throughout Vinland Saga, like it was all internally directed. One, it was for his inadequacies and his inferiorities, because he was unable to help his dad survive. He was unable to protect his dad, and he actually became the reason why his dad ended up dying in the first place, was because he wasn't strong enough to help his dad like in battle against Askeladd and the people that were invading their small little town. And then on top of that, as Thorfinn started to age and you see him go into his mind and like, he's not anywhere else. Like he's dreaming. Like that's it. He's just dreaming of like past events and having nightmares and having these experiences. And his subconscious, the underlying aspect from the conscious to the subconscious, is starting to leak through his dreams. So he thinks that he had all these enemies, but it's like the only enemy that he ever had was the enemy that was inside of him, the enemy that dwelt within his own psyche, that dwelt within his own individual aspect of himself, that was angry and resentful towards his inferiority and his weakness. He didn't want to have those feelings anymore. He wanted to escape those feelings. He wanted to become strong. He wanted to become somebody that could protect himself and say his dad if they were ever in those situations. At the time, he didn't know that. That wasn't what he was doing. He was just trying to revenge his father for the death that he had caused. It wasn't Askeladd that caused his death, at least not from Thorfinn's point of view. Thorfinn was the one that ended up killing his dad because he wasn't strong enough. And that resentment, it boiled up and it built into a monster. But that monster was only able to be slayed and like insatiated when there was no more, when he had already reached his goal, when he was already who he had to be. That's when the monster finally dissipated. And that's why Thorfinn got so lost at the beginning of season 2, is because he's like, I have no reason to live. Like the reason that I was living, the guy died, and now I have nothing left to do. So it's just like he had all these enemies, but it took him time. It took him years of reflection and staying by himself, which is why I think it's incredibly important for you listening to this right now, to like spend a day or a couple of hours not looking at your phone and just like sitting in meditation, just sitting by yourself, like just having moments of like stillness and peace and tranquility, and not looking at social media or watching videos like this. Like even after you finish this video right now, if you've made it up to this point, which if you made it up to the 10-minute mark, props to you, man, because I know a lot of people on my analytics, when I look at them, they dip off right away, and that's just how it is with a lot of YouTube content out there. But I know that my videos are incredibly valuable, and you're finding a lot of use out of this because you don't have any enemies. At least if you do, you're going to start to realize that they're actually on the inside of you and nobody's actually happening on the outside of you like Thorfinn did. So with that, it's just like you can create any reality that you want to. You can decide like that you are doing good or that you're doing bad, and obviously I think that everybody can do good and is doing good right now. Like just from the conversations that I've had with other individuals. But like, if you're able to take into regard that when you say have a purpose or you have a drive or you have something that you want to overcome, say enemies that are apparently appearing on the outside of you, it's not true. Because there's a quote, I can't remember who it's by. It's a philosopher of some sort, but it's like, wherever you go, there you are. And that quote, I always thought it meant like, wherever you go, there I am. It's just like, okay, well, yeah, this is where I am type of thing. But I've come to realize it's not that. It's the matter that other people are going to start to, say, manifest those traits or those characteristics that you're trying to run away from. So like, let's say you're in your hometown and you want to run away from something and you want to go somewhere else. That exact same thing that you're running away from will start to manifest in the new place that you end up going, because wherever you go, there you are. And that's why, like, if you think that you have enemies, all you're ever going to see is enemies. Whereas if you start to think that all you have is peace and all you know is happiness and joy and fulfillment and abundance, that's all you're going to see. It's a great miracle of the mind that Thorfinn discovered, and it's a hidden meaning in Vinland Saga, which I have a feeling that most of you didn't even pick up on. I didn't even pick up on it until just now when I decided to make this video. And it was just like, okay, this is something that somebody needs to hear, because somebody needs to hear this, because maybe you're struggling with the enemies and you think that the whole world's against you. And it's just like, I'm here to tell you, like, it's not. Nothing against you. Nothing is against you. Everything is working exactly in your favor in the exact way that it needs to. And you have to start looking within yourself and realizing that, like, the only enemies that you've ever been fighting have been your own thoughts, your own conceptions of the world, your own perceptions. Your own ego is the one that you've been fighting, because your mind wants you to stay in one specific place, whereas like you know that you're capable of more. You know that you can transcend to the next levels, that you can become a king, that you can become something new that you haven't originally been, because you decided that you didn't have any enemies, that you decided that the enemies that you were fighting, you decided to become friends with them, you decided to accept them, you decided to carry them on your backs, as Thorfinn did throughout the season 2 and through what he'll do with his entire life. Because your past experiences, like, they're your past. They don't have to identify with who you are. They don't have to make you any one way, shape, or another. All it is your past. And that's the great part about being a human, is like, you get to decide what your future looks like. You can remove everything from your past because now is new. And you can start to carry new things, and you can start to move in a new direction. Like, we never would have thought that Thorfinn would start to become and go off and become a king for probably season 3, if we ever get a season 3. We would have thought that, like, he was just this kid that was just killing everybody, which, don't get me wrong, every kid, every individual, I know I've been there too, where it's just like, we have this chip on our shoulder that it feels like we need to prove to other people that, like, we don't have enemies, or that we do have enemies, or that we're strong and that we aren't inferior to somebody else. Whereas, like, when we're able to let that go and realize that we are who we are and we're at the exact place that we need to be, it starts to help us realize that we don't actually have any enemies, and what we are is who we need to be. And by overcoming and transcending our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, our inadequacies, our inferiorities, by becoming stronger and letting certain aspects of ourselves go, this is when we can truly start to become king. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts in the description down below, because I'm trying a little bit different approach than what we have been doing in the past. Hope you guys are enjoying. The comments that I have been receiving seems like it's making a positive effect, so I'll keep making them, and I'll see you guys in the next video.